Hi, and welcome to this month's episode of Chopping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, CEO and founder of Shaping Wealth, and this is a monthly conversation we have with leaders in the field of financial planning, behavioral psychology, and other important fields. I'm really excited for today. I have with us Dr. Brad Klontz, who has been an inspiration for the work that I've done over the years, but we've actually never met until right now. So I'm excited to have you on Chopping Wealth. Brad, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here also. Everywhere I go, everybody knows Brian. So it's crazy. I think I've heard your name for like probably 20 years. So it's fabulous to be sitting down with you, talking.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is really cool for me. So I want to start by boiling the ocean with a really big picture and a question you can take it wherever you want. Why is money hard for people?
Wow. And it certainly is. I mean, that much we know. I've always been struck with we live in arguably one of the wealthiest times in human history in a country that we could argue is one of the top wealth countries in the world. We have a quality of life that seems pretty amazing given historical standards. Yet, every single year, the American Psychological Association does a Stress in America survey, and it's anywhere from 70 to 80 to 90% of Americans cite money as the number one source of stress in their lives, which doesn't make logical sense given the abundance and the relative abundance that we all seem to be enjoying. And I think it comes down to essentially two factors. Number one, we are just wired to do it all wrong. And I could explain probably most of problematic financial behaviors that I see with understanding a caveman, a tribal mindset. So we've spent most of our time on Earth in small hunter gatherer tribes. And what allowed us to survive and pass on our genes doesn't work when it comes to things that require a planning, future focus. And so just about everything that people make mistakes around money could be described through that. For example, if everyone in your tribe is sitting around the fire and you're eating, and all of a sudden everyone stands up and runs west, well, what are you going to do? You're going to stand up and run west. And the reason I know that is because anyone who didn't got picked off by a predator. And so when people are buying stocks and selling stocks and you see something on Instagram that you just got to have because everyone seems to be having this thing, you're just very prone to buy it, to go get it. And it really comes down to survival instinct. And then the second thing I'll say, because I'm sure we can talk for hours about that part, is that then you have how you are uniquely messed up when it comes to money based on your family experiences, how you grew up, what you were taught, what you weren't taught. And not only that, the experiences of your ancestors, which is a freaky topic that it does shape how you think around money. So all those factors combined, that's why we're terrible with money, I think.
So one thing I want to loop back to later, but we're going to get there in a certain way, is whether we can actually become better at money, or is it having to create an environment with constraints and guardrails and governors, whether those be rules or people around us who prevent us from being the worst version of ourselves with money. But we're gonna get there in a non-linear way. So to sort of a second boil the ocean type framework, and this is where I'm really excited to kind of get your historical perspective. Sort of behavioral finance, I'll put it in quotes, is a hot topic. I know, we go to conferences, we speak. It's like, oh, this is the behavioral finance talk. The room is packed. People want to know about it. And there's been a legacy of, well, people are really interested in this. And then secondly, okay, well, how do I apply this? And great. And we saw, I want to say roughly 2022, so 3, 4 years ago, that there was the official inclusion, a new wedge in the pie graph of the CFP curriculum for, behavioral finance or client psychology, whatever the official term is. And it's a 7% wedge. So 93% is not that, but now we've gone from 0% to 7%. Now, there were other elements of behavioral stuff sprinkled in over the years, and now it was consolidated. But it is a hot dot and it is a hot topic. And at the same time, we know going back decades, even prior to the invention of the CFP certification in the early 70s, that financial psychology, that life advice was a thing. You, I would put on the Mount Rushmore of people who have created a corpus that has influenced the shape of financial planning globally. And so I'm wondering kind of if you want to give a version of your history or your perspective on where the field started decades ago and how did we get where we are right now? Because there's lots of twists and turns in this story, I think.
Fascinating question. And it's interesting because first of all, I'm very honored to hear you talk about me on the Mount Rushmore. And I get humbled, I got to tell you, like every time I go around other financial planners and we were just talking before we started recording. Was at a conference last week, and this gentleman came up to me and said, "Hey, this is so great. I've been following your work. Fascinating stuff." And he said, back in 1994, I gave a presentation on the psychology of retirement. And this person had a background in counseling. And so every time I think I've discovered something new, I find these these very successful older planners are like, yeah, we've been doing this psychology stuff for a very long time. We didn't necessarily know what to call it, not having a background in psychology. And so one of the observations I've had is that when I'm up in front of an audience talking about some psychological concept or technique that advisors can use, invariably somebody will come up and say, "Oh, I've been doing that for years. I just didn't know that's what it was called." And what I've observed over time is the most successful, we have a survivorship bias. If we're going to look at the most successful group of financial planners, one of the reasons they're successful is that whether they were doing it consciously, subconsciously, they are integrating some of these concepts and mindsets around connecting with other human beings and being there with them and being good listeners. For example, they just happen to be good listeners, and guess what? It's amazing. They have this incredibly thriving financial planning practice. So I feel like people have stumbled upon this wisdom, and it's been sort of exciting to look at that and to put names to it and to try to find structured ways of teaching people, which I know is something you've been doing for many, many years. And so I think it's always been there, but it hasn't really been formalized. And the great thing about the CFP board, at least their methodology, is they will send out surveys to practicing planners and say, "Hey, what's on your mind? What are you doing? What are you talking about with clients?" And so this whole concept of this body of knowledge and work being included in the training standards is a grassroots thing, which is pretty exciting. So I think the profession has evolved in the sense that people are paying attention to it. They have a name for it, and they are acknowledging that they believe that working with human psychology and understanding human psychology is a huge part of the work that they do with clients.
That's great. Yeah, I think about some of the other major names in the field, like George Kinder or Nick Murray, or Rick. Gosh, I'm blanking on Rick's last name. But there's been these figureheads along the way who've done amazing work and been inspiring. But you raise such an important point about the grassroots, because ultimately many financial plan I'm sure your experience is the same as mine, working with thousands and thousands of advisors, that these are good people. These are good people trying to do good work for others. And why wouldn't they have that psychological or emotionally savvy component to what they do? You raise an important point about maybe just in the last few years, by giving a shape to it and some vocabulary, we can sort of bring together some collective wisdom that's been more of a grassroots movement over many, many years. Um, Something that pops into my mind, we make a distinction between advisors as mechanics versus guides. So people bringing technical expertise in portfolios and insurance and estate planning and such, and guides in terms of a human helping another human navigate uncertainty, complexity, and change. And I think there's sort of a soft working hypothesis in the industry is that technical expertise gets commoditized over time. And so what was once a huge task in terms of building a portfolio and trying to add alpha, now it's click, whether it be in a TAMP or some other relatively easy to execute. And that the edge, if you will, the competitive advantage in our industry is really more on the guidance side, on the financial psychology side. Treating that as a hypothesis, how do you react to something like that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's actually good to be a little bit threatened all the time. That's I've been in the industry long enough to know that it was robo advisors were going to make us all extinct, right? I mean, that was the word, and that was every article that was written, I don't know, 10 years ago. So I think it's good to kind of be like, all right, what's coming and how do I differentiate myself and how do I maintain a competitive edge? I do think that some of that is a bit of a threat, like in terms of our identity. Like if you identify yourself as somebody who's more of a strictly mechanic, I mean, there are some threats coming your way. Um, and so I think it's good to look at expanding your skill set. Like, how can I become more valuable? How can I provide more value to my clients? And something that I get really passionate about, I usually talk about this towards the end of the talk after I've established some sort of credibility with people before I say something outrageous. I mean, coming from a background in clinical psychology, I see financial planners and advisors as almost healers in our culture. And if you stick with me, I just told you that money's the biggest source of stress, and stress kills people. And there's been a lot of studies done on this. And one of the things that, back to the evolution of this, that I think is exciting as a scientist, of course, is the growing body of science and studies that are applying psychology to financial planning in particular is really exciting. And some of those studies show that stress around money is a major mortality risk factor, like right up there with diabetes and heart disease and smoking. And so, who do you go see when you're stressed about money? Who's going to help you deal with that stress? Now, ironically, not to throw all my mental health people, you know, off a cliff, but studies that I've done, mental health people not so great with money, like they tend to be more money avoidant, we're here to help people not make money, et cetera, those types of beliefs, based on the studies I've done. So who do they see? So I see us as a profession evolving and continuing to play a bigger role in clients' lives when we see ourselves. I love your word, as a guide. So it's not just around the plan and the mechanics of the plan, but it's like, well, how do I share the plan with my kids? How do I share? There's perhaps some uncomfortable things in a estate plan. Should I be sharing those with my kids? Should they just find out after I die? I mean, how do I think through those things? How do I think through different mindsets around money with my partner, with my spouse? How do I help a kid who's acting irresponsibly around money? So I think there's so many things that advisors can provide to clients.
Perfect. So now I'm wondering about the line between being therapeutic and delivering therapy. This is a bright line issue. Dr. Joy Leary on my team, who is a brilliant empath and wonderful person, she's so good on this particular issue, and we try to create some content around that. It's really a topic of interest for the financial planning community, broadly, because you don't have to convince anyone to bring financial psychology, or maybe in a more soft sense, empathy and communication skills into the planning context. But then you and I and Joy and Carl and others, we're talking about all this stuff, and it can maybe sound a little bit woo, and the advisor gets a little bit uncomfortable. So I know you've thought about this deeply over a long period of time. Sort of, how do we help advisors do psychology? I'm being a little crude, but how do we help them do psychology without becoming therapists?
Oh, such a great question. And I have had some disagreements, shall I say, intellectual disagreements, debates with people I love, like fellow academics and instructors around this very topic. And I actually don't like the word therapy when it comes to working in the financial advising field. And I say this too as a practicing financial advisor. I own an RIA. I'm not sure if you know that. And, it's like, I'm not talking to my clients about therapy. I'm not identifying myself as a therapist. I'm a clinical psychologist. I don't start with that, because within my company, within my business, within the context, they want financial planning. That's what I'm doing. And so I don't love the word therapy because I have a very strict association with it. And I saw this issue emerging when I first got interested in this topic a couple decades ago. And I remember being in a conference, and there was a planner talking about, bringing psychology into planning and everything. And I took out a napkin, I wrote an entire decision tree that I still reference around what is therapy, what is financial planning. And so you've got the mechanics. I'm a financial advisor. And then you're talking about a guide. well, what's the difference between that and psychotherapy, and what's the line? And I realized that that's pretty hard for you to really recognize if you've never actually done psychotherapy. And so I came up with a model around it, and I'm pretty strict around it too. Like, so as a clinical psychologist, I would never ever do therapy with a financial planning client. Now, I might be therapeutic. It's probably going to feel pretty therapeutic, but therapy, no, never, would never do it. It's actually unethical. It's unethical in the profession of mental health. I think it's unethical in the profession of financial planning. So where I draw the line is that you're not here to treat a mental disorder. And I'm going to use that terminology on purpose. I don't think that if you're in psychotherapy, you are disordered per se. There's a bunch of theory we can talk around that. I think everybody has a mental, if so, everyone has a mental illness. Okay. So welcome to the club.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. If you don't have one now, you're going to get one eventually. So I think it's pretty normal, but it's like, so drawing the lines around like, hey, look, you are a financial planner. So you can use techniques that are drawn from the field of psychology. Actually, a lot of professions use techniques that have been studied and drawn from the field of psychology, including nurses, coaches. Like there's an entire field of sports psychology. They're not treating mental illness. They're using psychology to help people perform better when it comes to their athletic pursuits. So I look at it from that type of model as a coach, as a guide. What can I draw from using techniques around listening, using techniques around helping motivate somebody to take action, but not doing psychotherapy, not trying to, and by that I mean specifically, you're not trying to treat somebody's gambling disorder, their major depression, their anxiety. You're not trying to treat an illness. Now, I do think it's important for you to understand as a practicing advisor, what are some money disordered type behaviors where I'm going to need to refer somebody to a mental health professional. So I think it's a good idea to study some of those, like compulsive buying disorder and gambling disorder, and what is hoarding disorder. Some of that really does matter, but mainly to understand like, whoa, you need to be working with another professional along with me. And so to have somebody you can refer people to.
What trend have you seen there in terms of an advisor having a go-to referral, a licensed therapist of one stripe or another? Have you seen that grow in over the industry?
I have seen that grow over the industry. And if I'm a financial advisor, though, right now listening, I'm going to be like, wait, I got to tell somebody to go see a shrink. I mean, it can be challenging. And so you have to have that as a concept that you feel okay with, people you perhaps met. And the people that I see do the best with it are sort of like, in our work, like it depends on how your practice is structured. But let's say you have an RIA, but you don't do tax planning, you don't do estate planning. So you might say, hey, look, this is what we do. This is the scope of what we do. At times, as I get to know you, we refer clients to estate planning attorneys. We refer them to marriage counselors or family counselors if they're struggling around money in the family system. We refer to tax, CPA people. I mean, it just as sort of a matter of fact sort of thing. This is just what we do. And so I think, yeah, entering it like that, I think helps with that.
Yeah, so I've never thought of it exactly in those terms. So I'm going to try to play it out a little bit because this is fascinating. So one way to maybe even think about the onboarding process and the early days of a relationship where things are, sort of a little bit fluid is in describing scope of services, to use a boring term. You can almost say, like, we know that money is this core stressor in our lives, to the data from the APA that you already cited. And so it's got implications that take us in a lot of directions, many of which I am not competent to take you, but I might be able to refer you to help. And that might be for technical planning issues, that might be for family and marriage issues, that might be for your own personal counseling, because this can be heavy duty. And maybe laying that out before you even get into a multi-year relationship with a client, you're then not giving just in time, oh, you need to go see a therapist. You're a mess. No, hey, we talked about this from the get-go, that I'm sort of a hub here at probably the most stressful juncture in your life, and I'm going to provide help in lots of directions, some of which that I can't deliver myself.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll say too, from the engagement, like for example, for my practice, like what we tell people is, oh, what do you do? Well, we do asset management, we do financial planning, and we do financial psychology. And so some of our clients, they want all of it. We do all of it. Some of them come and say, hey, I did a financial plan a year ago. I don't want to do another one. I just want asset management. So we do that. And so the way that we talk, and you'll find really quickly, clients will say, well, I'm ready. Essentially, I'm ready to do this. And so whatever that is, that's where we'll start. And we don't force it on anybody. And some people will be like, oh, well, what do you mean? What is financial psychology? And we're like, well, we have this coaching element where we work with people to help identify their beliefs around money and where they came from and family dynamics and to understand their beliefs around money. And we even have some goal exercises that are kind of fun where we have you visualize your goals. So we just explain it. And then people will tell you right away, it's like, oh, that sounds cool. I'd like that. Or they'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm not into that. I'm into this. And that's just my perspective. And that's how we've framed it. I know some advisors have a very strict process, like every single client does X, Y, and Z. And I think that's okay. I just sort of learned as a clinical psychologist that when I try to impose, I would say that type, not to be judgmental, but that type of structure on some people, sometimes it's not a great fit. And it's okay if that's how you've designed your practice. You're like, we want people who are only ready to do it the way we want to do it. I think that's an okay approach. I prefer more of a flexible model because I in my mind I'm like, well, maybe they'll do planning next year, or maybe this financial psychology will come into play when there's a crisis event happening in their life, which I know is going to happen at some point. And so I'm okay being sort of in their life for the long term and realizing we have this entire tool belt that we can pull out a tool whenever we need it.
Yeah, it's great. I want to talk about some of the innovations you've driven in the industry, and there's been some substantial ones. I want to talk about money scripts to start off. That's something that is closely associated with you. Tell us what a money script is, and tell us about kind of your journey with that concept leading up to the tools that you've created for advisors. Many of the listeners of Chopping Wealth are going to be familiar with this, but I'd like to kind of get the context and how we got to where we are.
Okay, so I started with essentially going right into doing a treatment program for people who were struggling with money. And I say treatment program because at that time, my father owned a treatment center. And as part of my education around clinical psychology, I'd done all sorts of studies using their treatment approach with, unrelated to money. And so we developed a program, my father and I and Rick Kaler, to help treat money disorders that we ran. And as part of that, we needed some type of measurements to find out, first of all, what's the problem here? And number two, are we making it better or are we making it worse? That's always a good question to ask and to study if you're diving into new territory. And so literally at that point, I started to do a literature review, and I was shocked that no test really existed that looked at money beliefs. And there was one called I won't get into the scale, I don't want to cause any controversy, but an older measure. And it essentially looked at beliefs and behaviors. And essentially the conclusion was that there was no association between financial outcomes and beliefs around money. And as soon as I read it, I said, that's wrong. That's impossible. And the reason I say that is because there's been thousands of studies done on beliefs in general, and it's associated with everything. If you associate with depression, associate with anxiety, associate with everything. And so at that moment, I knew I needed to create another measure, but it was very strictly, if I had found a better one, I probably wouldn't have created a money script questionnaire. I wasn't into test design necessarily, but I needed one to measure what are these beliefs and are they helpful or do they hurt? Do they predict behaviors? Do they predict income? Do they predict net worth? And so essentially that's what I ended up creating. We ran the program for many years. We had exercises that gathered beliefs around money. We ended up calling money scripts because for many people, it was like a script in a play that was written for them by their grandparents. It wasn't something that they actively chose. A lot of it was subconscious. They weren't even aware of it. George Kinder called it, partially true beliefs. And I really resonated with that when I learned that from him, because they're actually entirely true. They're 100% true in a particular context. So that's what we ended up doing, was gathering those beliefs. And then we went through the academic rigor of developing an assessment and administering it. Now over 100,000 people, and then testing and how those beliefs predict various outcomes.
Has it been rewarding to build all this? It's kind of cool.
It's been pretty fun. It's been pretty fun. I again, like, I wouldn't even be in this field, frankly, if I wasn't really deeply curious myself. And my origin story is that I grew up lower income. I amassed a huge amount of student loan debt. I saw a friend of mine make $100,000 in 1 year day trading, and I had $100,000 student loan debt. I'm like, oh my gosh, this must be what rich people do. I watched him make 100,000 in a year, and so I sold everything I owned. It was pretty dramatic, but I had a great success for a few months, and then all of a sudden I lost all my money because the tech bubble burst, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. And so I literally immediately went to the field of psychology, and I did a lit review. That's what we call it, a literature review. I'm going to find out why I am messed up when it comes to money. And very quickly, I realized that psychology had utterly ignored the topic of money. And I was shocked by that. I was like, what? This is insane. And so I sort of joke, from a clinical psychologist perspective, that I became the world's leading psychologist around money within like a week.
Because nobody else was focused on it.
Exactly. That's how easy it is to become smart. Is if you think about something that no one else is really thinking about. So I didn't set out to, well, quite frankly, too, Brian, if I had found a bunch of articles that said, oh, this is why you do it, it's because of your money scripts, I'd be like, oh, really? Oh, wait, and here's a test you could take. That's incredible. Oh, I get it. I did it because of this. And then I would have probably moved on. Who knows what I'd be doing right now? But then I got really curious because that stuff didn't exist. And then I was like, oh, I got to create it because I need it for this and that and the other. And so it's been a really fun, evolving field that I've just been really interested in, and primarily because other people weren't doing it.
Right. That's really cool. Can we walk through the four main scripts: avoidance, worship, status, and vigilance? I think to me this is like classic rock radio. Like you're never tired of hearing the oldies, right? And maybe for some this is new, and that's amazing also. But these concepts have shaped my own self-examination, conversations with friends and loved ones, but also, thinking about, sort of the psychology of financial planning. It's front and center. So however you like to, maybe we can sort of, check each of these boxes.
Sure. So what we did is we administered this to a bunch of people, and then we ran what's called a factor analysis. So I didn't make up these categories. These categories emerged because people tended to answer in a certain way. And so then we're left with these four categories, like, oh, what do we call them? And so that was kind of fun. So I named the first one money avoidance. And these are beliefs: money is bad, rich people are greedy, there's virtue in having less money. So by the way, this is a common thought of social workers and therapists. You're actually more virtuous if you don't have money. And it's this negative association with money. And, again, this is very subconscious for a lot of people. And the other thing I want to mention too is that, first of all, it's obviously not good for you financially. I mean, it's sort of shocking results. Guess what? People who have this belief have lower net worth and less income, and they engage in self-destructive financial behaviors. But, with compassion and with empathy, there's always a story where people had a terrible experience. Like there's some rich people who've been very terrible to other people throughout history. And sometimes this is a direct experience of your ancestors or something you had. And it's a terrible belief in the sense that you always can find examples of terrible rich people. It's all over the place. So confirmation bias kicks in. And this is that natural way that we have our cave person brain. We're looking for things to confirm the way we believe. And so it can be really sticky. And then you surround yourself with a bunch of other money avoidant people. And this is how all these types of beliefs work. And then you don't get challenged. You're not able to evolve. So money avoidance.
Before you go on, I just wanted to just from a research design point of view, if I knew it, I forgot it, and I don't think I knew it. Through the factor analysis, factor regression, you didn't do the top-down work to create categories and then sort of explore and label people. You basically did some sort of multivariate sort of regression across a lot of data based on questions and maybe other data points, and then these four, what now sound like clusters, emerged from that. And then these are the four money scripts.
That is correct.
Okay, good. Fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the way it works. Cause I wanted to know reality. Like I didn't have this, like, by the way, I was clueless. Okay. So I'm a clinical psychologist. We're studying the psychology of money and beliefs around money. I had no idea. If I was working in the field for 40 years, I probably would have been like, oh, there's like 5 types of people. And then I would have gone to test that. I had no idea. I had no idea. I just knew that beliefs are going to have something to do with how you're doing with money. And so I was very agnostic from that sense. I didn't care. I just wanted to discover things. So, and essentially to make it simple, people who are very likely to agree with rich people are greedy are also very likely to agree that there's virtue in having less money. So that's essentially how the factors emerge. So if people say they really highly agree to this, they tend to say that with this other item. So they're yeah. Yeah. So the second category is what we originally called money worship, which I've changed to money focus. And the reason I've done that is because I'm a financial advisor and I don't want to tell my client that they worship money. They might fire me immediately. And I felt like money focused is a little bit easier to swallow. By the way, in full disclosure, I score higher on this scale. I have 2 scales that I score high on. So this is the belief that, more money is going to make you happier. Money is freedom. If I had more money, my problems would be gone. Now, first of all, right? Isn't more money better? So I think it is to a degree, but what I think we found associated with this is that people associate with stuff too. And so what we found in our studies, people with this belief tend to have lower income, tend to have lower net worth, and tend to have higher credit card debt because they want more stuff, the next thing that's going to make me feel better. I actually feel like this is the average American consumer. I mean, this is kind of what we struggle with, I think, as a country. But yeah, it's sort of putting money on the pedestal. It's going to solve all my problems. It's going to make my life so much better.
Okay. And so more intense purchasing behavior is associated with money focus.
Yes, that's what we found. Yep, higher credit card debt.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Third.
Third one is what we ended up calling money status. And this is where your self-worth, well, literally one of the questions is your self-worth equals your net worth. If I probably tell people I make more money than I actually do. I probably tell them I make more than I actually do. People are admitting to this. I'm not going to buy something unless it's new, So it's the easiest way to look at it. It's the keeping up with the Joneses psychology, essentially. And again, it's associated with terrible self-destructive financial behaviors, lower income, lower net worth. This was the one item that was associated in our studies with socioeconomic status when you were growing up. And so if you're more likely to have this money status thing if you grew up poor. And again, full disclosure. So I mentioned that I came from a lower income. My family split when I was young. And so when I got out with my doctorate, I felt a bit like an imposter in grad school too. Everyone there seemed to have wealthier parents than I did. And I was told like, oh yeah, well, no, there's this whole other culture, of professionals and there's a whole watch culture. So I learned about the watch culture. And so I have a net worth of negative $100,000 and I go buy my first and only luxury watch for a couple grand. And I went and bought my mother a very large, thick gold bracelet. I was living in Hawaii, so a Hawaii heirloom bracelet with her name on it. And when I would go home, my mom would be like, "Oh, hi." This is like her friend that I grew up with. "Oh, this is my son, Dr. Brad Klontz." And she'd be introducing me like that. And so I was susceptible to it. I fell for it. And as you know too, Brian, that a lot of the research on the psychology of ultra wealthy individuals, and I've done some of that research, they tend to actually downplay what they have, which we'll get to in a minute. So yeah, that money status thing is not great for your financial health.
Okay, cool. And then leaves us with one more. Is that vigilance?
Yeah, that's money vigilance. And I would say this is probably most financial advising clients because they're more likely to have higher net worth, higher income, better overall financial health, lower revolving credit card debt. I mean, this is the one that's associated with better financial outcomes. And it is what it sounds like. It's vigilance around money. So there's some fear of the future. And so we talked a little bit about the K-person brain. K-person brain's only focused on survival now. Well, to actually amass wealth, you need to have a future orientation. So I'd be a nervous wreck if I didn't have money saved for an emergency. That's an interesting one, right? What's also fascinating is if people ask me how much money I made, I'd probably tell them I make less than I actually do. And so I do a lot of social media stuff targeting younger audiences. And that's one of the things I try to drive home. It's like actually the people out there flexing all the stuff on Instagram, I almost guarantee you they're one of two things. Well, one of three things. Number one, they're broke and they're faking it. Number two, they're on their way to being broke, or number three, they're spending someone else's money. But what we do know is that they really, really care about how you think about them, and they really, really want to impress you. And ironically, the money vigilant actually downplay it. They're not the ones out there doing that.
So two trends or phases. One is just growing older from your teens to your later days, and then generational shifts from Boomer to Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, now Gen Alpha, and I gather this last year was the first year for Generation Beta. I don't know. The money scripts, the four categories, are there trends in how, as you age, you kind of land within one or more of those buckets? And then secondly, as we think about generational differences, how does the money script framework mediate that? I do, like on the Shaping Wealth side, lots of conversations with financial planners trying to connect the Boomer or elder Gen X with the young millennial or Gen Z child, and figuring out who's who and where there are shared beliefs and how you can have better communication. So if you could run those two scripts through the framework, I think people would find that helpful.
Yeah. So I'll actually mention three things that emerged with regard to demographics and these four different scales. The first one is age. So as people age, they tend to have lower levels of money status, money worship, and money avoidance beliefs, and higher levels of money vigilance. And so the age definitely appears to be a protective factor. I mean, I get these emails all the time on social media too. Hey, I'm 70 and now I'm really worried about retirement. So all of a sudden you're vigilant when you're 70. I mean, obviously it's better to be vigilant when you're earlier, but that seems to be sort of a natural progression. I mean, when you're in your 20s, are you really thinking about retirement? Is that really top of mind for you? And what we find is people get older, they tend to care more and think more about the future and be more dedicated to saving and investing. Which is something obvious, which is one of my passions too, is to get people really interested when they're 18, 17, 16. That's why I put out TikTok videos. It doesn't impress anyone in our generation. I'm trying to make an impression.
I've heard I'm gonna, maybe at the end I'll ask. I've heard rumors of this TikTok thing, and I've never been on TikTok.
Don't go on there. Your whatever regard you hold me in will plummet when you see what I'm willing to do on that app to get people's attention around financial health.
Okay, well, then I will have mixed views. Okay, cool.
Yeah, the second one is education. So people who have higher levels of education tend to have healthier money scripts. And then the third one, which is fascinating, is that people who are single tend to have less healthy money scripts compared to people who are married. And it kind of makes intuitive sense. And I'll use myself as an example. So when I first met my wife, I was, saving and investing and paying off debt with like 70% of my income, like quite literally. I had a $500 car. I had no furniture, and then my wife, we're dating, and she didn't say it, right away, but eventually it sort of squeaked into the conversation like, hey, Brad, maybe we should get a couch, and I remember sweating, Brian. I'm like, oh my gosh, how much is, and by the way, I'm in my 30s and I have lawn chairs for furniture. And I will say though, I think that she identified perhaps a belief that was somewhat limiting, because I went ahead and got a couch. They're super comfortable. Can't recommend them enough. If you don't have one.
I'm pro couch as well. I just want to put that on the record. Very pro couch. Yeah.
And so I think what she did is she made my beliefs more healthy. Like you can be too vigilant too, by the way. Like we all have clients who are just way too money vigilant. They can't sleep at night. They've got millions invested. They can't take out a distribution. They're just terrified. And so I truly believe that she was able to balance me out because she got some insight. She got an up close and personal view of Brad's money scripts. And she's like, are you sure? Is that, so I mean, essentially she was a bit of a coach or a mirror, or, one of the roles that we play for people just by repeating back to them, oh, so this is your goal. And it's so fascinating being a good listener and just that reflective listening, because then you hear it and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know. I guess it does sound ridiculous that I'm too afraid to get a couch because I don't want to be poor. Um, so I think having, there's a benefit of having somebody who has insight into what you're doing, because it helps, I think, move us towards health.
What's your assessment of how the industry has used the money scripts framework? Has it been, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, quite frankly. But I know a growing number of people over the years have been, using it as a way to help gather some information. It's a really quick and easy way of doing it. You just give somebody an assessment, they fill it out. But there are other ways to do it too. I know that for many planners, getting some insight into somebody's beliefs around money. First of all, people love it, quite frankly. Like it's, everyone loves to take a little test and find out where you land on various things like risk tolerance. It's more fun than a risk tolerance questionnaire, by the way. Just the questions are. Um, but yeah, I think that I know some people do that as part of their standard assessment process. Some people will bring in those types of discussions or that type of an assessment. If they do more of a financial coaching or guiding type program. But I think there's a growing number of people who are integrating those types of conversations and tools with clients.
So it prompts a question I've been thinking about in different ways over many years, which is what are the right tools that an interested financial advisor should use to get to know their clients? Let's assume just a very virtuous interest in what makes somebody tick, because you want to give the best possible advice that they'll both understand and follow, and can engage in an organic dialogue over the years and hopefully decades. And I look at the Kitsy's Tech Map, um, and I look at what you've created, what we've created, my partner, Dr. Meg Lertz, brilliant things that she's done. There's so many tools. It's such a supermarket of values-based exercises, the Klontz tests, money story exercises, a variety of things. I know for sure that advisors are overwhelmed by the choices in that space. How would you counsel a financial advisor to choose the right tool or method to start a healthy journey in financial psychology with their clients?
That's such a great question.
I'm waiting for you to answer because I have no freaking clue. I mean, really, go to the. I don't know if you've, the Kitsy's map at this point has hundreds and hundreds of little icons squeezed on there. There's 14 risk tolerance questionnaires. There's a whole behavioral assessment category. Your stuff's on there. It's wild.
Oh, my stuff's on there. I didn't know that.
Or maybe it is. I don't know. I can't even read it at this point.
I haven't risen to get on that map yet. It's a life goal. It's a challenging question because I think it would be dangerous too, frankly, if there was only one way to do it. I would be actually uncomfortable with that. I would be a little bit. Um, and I feel like, all right, so there's a couple elements to your question there. And the one that I really want to hit on is, okay, so I'm a practicing financial planner. How the heck do I find out how to do this? And I think it's essentially connecting with somebody who's been doing it for a while, who has same way you in terms of getting a CRM. Like, how did you get a CRM? You probably talked some people who are doing it, and how did you do it, and which ones have you tried, and which one did you recommend? And you probably did that 2 or 3, 4 different times with different people, and then you decided what might be the best fit for you. I don't think we have a better way of doing it, quite frankly. So, read the books, consult with somebody who's an expert in this area, who's been doing it for a while, take what they say, see if it fits, do that a few times. Because you may find over time that you start with one risk tolerance questionnaire, for example, and then you shift later because that one's too long, or clients don't like the question, or just doesn't really fit. So I think it's something that's probably always evolving. And I can tell you, as somebody who also works with planners, and I have a firm myself, it's like, just because you started with one doesn't mean you're going to end with it. You may evolve into another technology or another approach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a terrible answer, Brian. I wish I would have just could tell you what it is, but
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't look, I think there's just a existing demand or interest for psychological insights into one's clients. That's always been the case in the industry. Hey, what makes them tick? What makes him or her tick? And they want to have a good tool. And sometimes you find, well, hey, this gamified thing is neat and people like it and it only takes 3 minutes. Or, hey, my style is I want to understand your story. And one of our onboarding meetings or early days meetings is going to be, a structured conversation about your money story and your history. And I guess in part there's a supply issue and a demand issue. But before moving on to some other topics, I just wanted to plant a flag in your KMBI, the Klontz Money Behavior Inventory, and if you could just share kind of what the impetus for that was, and where does that fit into sort of this world that you've built of psychological insight.
Yeah, so the money behavior inventory was essentially just a measure for me to measure whether we can change people's behaviors. And I've done a treatment program. I've also done other interventions to try to get people to save more money, for example, like how do we get people to save more money, et cetera. And so I think that one's probably less relevant for the average financial planner. It's a great screening device, though, like whether people have, they're in financial denial, or they have a overspending issue, or they're a workaholic, or they're engaging in financial enabling, or they are struggling with financial dependence and the psychological issues related to that. So it covers it's the money script is strictly behavior or strictly beliefs, and the behavior inventory is strictly behavior. And so I separated those two out. And so for some people who are into coaching, or you want to screen for some of that, if you're noticing it, like, hey, I'm just noticing some behaviors that are of concern. And by the way, if people are engaging in behaviors that are concerning, they know it, so it's usually not that much of an intervention. Would you mind just taking the screener? And that's the way I do look at these also. They're not meant to, like, quote, diagnose, or you're in this category, you're in that category. And I'll just go back to the money script one on this one, just to illustrate this point. What was fascinating in the research, one of the things we found is that people who are money avoiders, so remember, rich people are bad, money's greedy, they tend to score really high on money worship too. I wish I had more money, I wish I was richer. And you're like, wait, aren't those like totally opposite conflicting beliefs? And the answer is, yep, they are. And it's going to cause all sorts of problems. But so these aren't meant to be like, oh, that's who I am and that's what I am. I mean, people can go up and down in the scores over time, and you might see elevations in a couple different areas.
So you touched on the topic of behavior change, which we could spend not just an hour, but an entire college course on. And I know this is something that, as a practicing therapist or counselor, but also financial planner, you've thought about and worked on for decades. Meg, my partner, has done amazing writing on trans-theoretical model of change as applied to financial planning. It's something that we've built a whole program around. And it's just a real eye-opener. I guess share with me or us your principles on behavior change in the context of financial planning. What are we really here to do with regard to fill in the blank? Saving more, investing better, being more charitable, purchasing the right insurance, whatever the decision note is, but like the behavior change framing of that, how have you how have you thought about that over the years?
Well, I just want to echo too that Dr. Lertz is the best. She's the best. All right. So I feel like, like when you're trying to change somebody's behavior, I mean, like, just step back a little bit and just be like, whoa, that's presumptuous.
Right, right.
It's like you're doing something I don't want you to do, and I'm gonna, try to get you to do something that I want you to do. So let's just start with that. And because I would never try to change someone's behavior that they didn't come in and say that they wanted changed as a financial planner. They're coming in and saying, I want to achieve this type of goal or whatever it is. So I'm interested in shifting behaviors that are going against what they're telling me they want. So we have to start by saying that. So we're not trying to do anything here tricky here to get them to buy a product. Like no, don't use anything to, tricks to make people do something that's not in their best interest, etc. So I think it's really along the lines of supporting somebody in achieving a goal that they want to achieve. So for example, I want to retire when I'm this particular age, and then they are not saving and investing enough to achieve that goal. And as an advisor, you definitely need to tell them, you've sort of identified this issue and you're like, hey, look, this is the goal. This is what you're doing. We're not going to achieve that goal. And it's sort of at that moment, once you've presented them with that a client who using the trans theoretical model is in the action phase, you'd say, so what I need you to do is invest 500 more a month. And they say, oh, okay. And then they go do it. And then you see them a week or two or a month later and they're, how's it going with that? Great. I'm doing it. I'm automating it. Perfect. There's no like behavioral change at that point. Actually, I did the behavioral change by showing them the analysis, presenting it to them, and then they changed their behavior. So, but the question, and I think a lot of the fun techniques and tools come from them then sort of like making an excuse, if you will. Just put it in advisor tone out. Well, this is the reason I'm not doing it. Okay, so in those moments, what do you do as an advisor conversationally or using a tool or whatever to help move them in the direction that makes them more likely to start taking action to achieve the goal they told you they wanted, and not sort of make it less likely for them to move in that direction. So that's really, I think, where those techniques and tools come into play typically.
Is there something with regard to clients who don't follow our advice? Um, is there something in common that you've seen over the years, both as a planning practitioner, but also as a counselor, that sort of unifies that subpopulation of folks who they understand what you're saying, probably, or well, actually, I don't want to bake the question. Maybe they don't understand what you're talking about and pretend like they do. Maybe they do understand and disagree. Maybe they do understand, they do agree, and then but they're just unable to for some reason. I guess what have you seen in terms of that, where advice doesn't stick? Why is that?
We talking about my kids now, or are we back to clients? Yeah. So when I'm giving advice and my kids, I mean, my clients aren't responding. I mean, I feel like it's less useful to categorize somebody as like in denial or pre-contemplative. I think that's less useful than it is to categorize them around a specific domain. So, for example, we've all had this experience too. You have a client and you're like, oh, here's your to-do list. You got to do all these eight to 10 different things. And what you'll typically find is clients are like, boom, boom, boom. I'm in the action phase around the stuff I came in and told you I wanted to do. Let's go, let's sign, let's move it. Let's, yes, yes, yes. But there might be some things on that list that they're in total denial around, or they're pre-contemplative around. Like, they're coming to you for asset management and you could clearly see they need a will and an estate plan, but they don't want to do it. They're resistant to doing it. And it's just a very curious question. Why are they resistant? And I think one of the best approaches too, as an advisor, is to trust that resistance a little bit. I've seen situations where if you actually in that moment sat a couple down and said, okay, so which one of the kids is getting what, it's going to lead to a divorce. And so who are you to say they need to be divorced because you're shoving this down their throat? And maybe that's something they can talk about 5 years from now or 10 years from now, or maybe never. Like, I mean, it's like, you don't know why people are resisting. And so I think it's like you said, with empathy, like I will tell somebody, hey, look, this is something we need to do. And if there's resistance, that's when I have to shift it up in terms of using techniques. But I don't think people are necessarily resistant or not resistant. It's around what particular action item are they stuck on.
A bit of a dotted line to the next topic of shame. You've written about this. I know with Dr. Leary on my team, it's a topic that comes up in what we present to advisors. It's a deeply unsettling topic, but people in money life feel shame around a number of different things, probably driven by their earlier life experiences and such. It's a difficult topic. How would you counsel financial planners trying to be better in this field of the psychology of planning to understand and approach and transcend the topic or the phenomenon of shame?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic that Sigmund Freud was the first one who really identified the connection between money and shame, in a lot of gross ways. He had a lot of gross stuff he's always talking about. But essentially, it's like, yeah, it's shame. It's like shame is very closely linked to money. And why is it linked that closely to money? I think it's our tribal collection. It's like, how are people seeing me? And so I would just sort of assume that people are probably going to have some shame around money. And if they don't, that's more of a surprise. So I would always sort of approach it that way, with really in really kind way, to make sure that you're not coming across as judgmental. I mean, even to the point where you're meeting, first of all, people never talk about money. So, because we're worried that we're going to be judged. It's like, if you and I started talking about our net worth, we'd be like, oh, our people are going to look at me and be like, oh, Brett, that's all you have, or oh my gosh, you have so much, or whatever. You should be here, you should be there. I mean, that's why we don't do it. So we're worried about being judged or misperceived or whatever. I think everybody has shame when it comes to that. And part of it is, I think, one of the healing factors, and one of the healing positions we're in as financial advisors, is if people are more likely to tell us sort of the intimate details of their financial life. And what an incredibly healing experience it would be for a lot of people around shame is if you just, as they're talking to you, you just loved them. Loved them with your eyes, loved them with your listening, with paying attention, with not being judgmental, with I mean, that in and of itself is probably the best way to treat shame, frankly, is to talk about something you're feeling ashamed about in the presence of somebody who is going to, I'm using the word love, I'm not trying to sound weird, but essentially you're it's okay, and you're accepting of where they're at, and you're normalizing it. And people will stumble around. It's like, I don't know if other people deal with this. And you're like, you know what? This is a really oh no, this is common. You'd be surprised. And I even do de-shaming things too. If you had any idea how many other people like talk about this, and nobody talks about it, we all feel like we're alone in it. So I think it's we're in a powerful place to help reduce shame for people.
Joy has this brilliant line that we need to stop pathologizing normal human behavior. And that when we, and listeners of Chopping Wealth will, I'm going to resist the soapbox about kind of behavioral finance 1.0 and overemphasis on biases and flaws and sort of the mistakes that we make. You know, much of the time, the decisions we make, the behavior we follow through on, is us just figuring out how to get by, and it's not what economists call irrational, which is a fancy word for stupid. It's not stupid or irrational at all. It's just normal. And so, to your point about de-shaming, creating a healing moment, a safe space, it's normalizing even a conversation around money before you get into the details of that. That normalization, that in and of itself is amazing work by the financial planning community. Now, the outward view of the financial advisors isn't great when you look at the headlines, but when you look at what actually takes place in these conversations, they can be wonderful. They can be so helpful and so healing.
Yeah, I agree. And the de-shaming thing too, it goes beyond just our cognitive biases and how we screw up and all this. It's like, not only that, but how could you be doing anything different given where you grew up, given what was taught to you, given what happened in your family history or in your culture or in your community? And so I think putting it into a larger perspective, and a lot of it's de-shaming for people too when they dig around in their own family history around money, and because this is stuff people usually don't talk about. And so I know when I was trying to unravel my psychology, I went back and I talked to my mother, because that's what we do. We blame mothers in psychology. And I'm like, Mom, what was it like for you growing up around money? And then grandma and grandpa, and all these stories emerged, Brian, that I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder I did what I did, and stuff nobody had talked about. Nobody had shared with me, but I was living out the consequences just emotionally, not really understanding why I'm doing it. And so just the exercise of looking at where your beliefs come from and interviewing your parents or your grandparents and your family history, it's so powerful, because the bottom line when it comes to money is we all know what we should be doing, I mean, and few of us are doing it exactly the way we should be doing it in every area. And so just really understanding why really helps.
I want to wrap up with, and this has been amazing. Thank you. I want to wrap up with I want to broaden the lens on helping people have better financial life outcomes. And what I've done for a number of years, you've actually branched out more widely via, social media, jokes about TikTok aside, is sort of how do we just help people get to a better place? And, there's the financial planning community, which does a lot of good and I think will grow in its importance and relevance. But then there's the just direct to people. Just go, whether it be through financial literacy programs or everything that's now possible via social media technologies, AI increasingly. I guess, especially because you have built a massive platform on TikTok, you do connect with who knows how many thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of young investors there. How have you thought about the spectrum of solutions to better financial life outcomes in the context of kind of the resources that we have available to us, the pace of life nowadays, the available technologies?
I feel like the technologies in many ways have made it a much more even playing field for everyone to have access to investing, for example. I mean, like I'm old enough that, you couldn't even get into the market. Now you can do it on your phone. With $1, you can start with hardly any money at all. So, I mean, in some ways, it's technology has really helped people gain access. Now, unfortunately, there hasn't been any education associated with it. I mean, gradually we're doing that more and more in the schools, which is just incredible to watch as each state continues to roll out mandatory financial literacy education. I mean, 20 years ago there was zero. I don't know what the number is now, but I know it's um, several, if not half the states, it's a mandatory requirement. So I think that's great. I also feel like one of the reasons I got on TikTok and now I'm on all the other platforms, but was I saw my nephews were showing me this app, and all of a sudden, this like I'm watching all these funny cats or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden, this day trading video popped up, and I was like, "What? I thought we were over. I thought we were done with this." No, all these bad ideas get recycled every generation, and then someone gets burned, and then it gets recycled again. And I'm not to disparage crypto at all. I mean, I do see it as a totally legitimate asset class, but I think there's like 2 million coins. It's like, a lot of those are going to zero. And so people get sucked into that get rich quick thing. So I actually sort of a call to action to advisors, and this is sort of scary, but a lot of young people, the only place they're getting their information right now on financial literacy is Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest. I mean, they're getting it on social media. That's where they're getting their news. That's where they're getting all of their education. Now, and I'll tell you this too, a lot of these platforms, they have educational initiatives. So like I've worked with people at TikTok and at YouTube because what they want is like, oh, you're doing financial education content and you don't look like you're a scammer. How can we support you to create more educational content? And so I'll just throw this out. I mean, I would love it if every advisor listening right now started to create good financial literacy content and put it out on social media, because I'd love to drown out all the terrible information that's out there. And so I think that, and by the way, that's where these young generations get their money. That's where they're going to find their professionals. I know a lot of young advisors who've gone from 0 people in their practice to more than they can possibly handle by doing basic financial education on social media.
The ability for people like you and maybe me, but people in our orbit to normalize conversations about money before you get into the weeds of better ways to save or invest or any other element of our financial lives. But, sort of creating a space where this most stressful of topics to bookend your original comment about how the American Psychological Association to normalize conversations around this, I think, is work of great social benefit. So for that, thanks for what you've done. Well, we've gone well beyond an hour. I could keep going, but we're not.
You just cut out all the dumb stuff I said. Choo-choo. Shorten it down.
Yeah, yeah. No, they'll cut me before they cut you. Trust me. How can people find you? What are the best platforms and channels to access Dr. Brad Klontz?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I try to create content that's relevant for platforms, so you won't see my TikTok videos on LinkedIn, but I'm on all the platforms where I'm trying to, I'll make a fool of myself for financial health, and I'll do it shamelessly. I get all these DMs all the time. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, somebody sent me one the other day, is like, hey, I've been watching you since high school, and I want you to know that I just graduated college. I got my first job, and Dr. Brad, I'm maxing out my 401k. And it's just, you know, you can find me there every day trying to just catch the one person at the right time to make that shift that changes their life.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
And for everybody, this has been Chopping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, CEO and founder of Shaping Wealth, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.